Grief, moving on, and how I suffered both at 35. Live for me, babe, and continue to look for happiness. The words faint on his lips filled the room. The heart monitor beeped as tears streamed down my face. I will, Brad. I love you so much. I love you too, he said quietly. I reached for his hand, holding it tightly. Our wedding bands touched, signifying the bond we had with each other. Till death do us part, except that death came so much quicker than I imagined. The faint line indicated the reality of the situation. Brad was gone. I leaned forward, holding his faintly warm hand as sobs escaped me. I knew Chris and his wife Esme were there, both of them as my support. Brad's family was there too, but none of them mattered. The only person I could think about was Brad and how I had lost him. Why did you have to go, Brad? Why the hell did he have to get diagnosed with liver cancer not even 2 years after we walked down the aisle? It was so unfair. All I could do was cry and feel the crushing reality of the moment and how I lost the one man who meant the world to me, now taken by death's embrace. 6 months later. Come on, Derek, you can at least come with Esme and me. I shook my head, holding the beer in my hand. I'm good. You know I don't like functions like that. But there are so many people that you can meet, he cried out. You won't get any better if you just sit around and mope. He was right, but even after 6 months, I still felt numb. I glanced at the picture of Brad and me happily married. People clapped and cheered and flowers decorated the background around us. It was one of the happiest days of my life, and yet the happiness was so short-lived. I know, I just can't bring myself to go out and meet people. It just hurts. What, like blind dating? Yeah, I admitted. I don't like going to events either as your third wheel. I appreciated Chris allowing me to tag along, but he and Esme were both so happy. Their smiles lit up the room, and whenever I was around them, I always felt like the odd guy out. I hated that, especially since I felt as if I was doing the disservice to Chris by being there. You're not the third wheel, Derek, but if you don't want to, that's fine. I thought he would drop it there, but then Chris moved closer and rested his hand on my shoulder. You should try to find something that brings you joy again. Maybe going on singles retreats or casual dating. I shrugged. It isn't easy. I know, bro, but remember what he said. You need to find happiness. Chris's words straight from Brad stung upon hearing. Yeah, I know. Don't remind me. Chris left to go back and get Esme so they could go to that party. I glanced down at my phone. Grindr was open, which was ironically where I met Brad. There were a couple of LGBT dating sites now, and I thought maybe I should make one. But as my fingers rested on the keys, I stopped myself. The tears fell again. I can't do this. I quickly exited, feeling regretful for even trying to do that. I wasn't ready to move on. The grief still struck. A month later. Woo! This is fun! We raced down the rapids. My team was filled with other single guys and gals, all working together. The rapids were fun to move about, and we made it to the final stretch. After, we had food together. It was some singles retreat that Chris told me about. He said if I wasn't ready to start dating, I could at least go out and meet others. Yeah, easier said than done. I had nice conversations, but every time they talked about anyone, whether an ex or even themselves, dread formed. I wasn't supposed to be here alone. This was something that Brad wanted to do. One guy, who I believed was named Oscar, talked to me about possibly coming hiking with him since I expressed interest in it. The adventure would be fun, he clamored. We have a whole group, all of us ready and raring to go. Sounds nice, I said as I drank some water to rehydrate. I would love for you to come along with us. So what do you say? I couldn't. In my heart, all I could think about was Brad. I wanted to be here with him, but the realization that we would never have this hung heavily over me. I'm flattered, but I can't, I stated. I've got to go. I turned and headed away from the rest of the people on the retreat. The pathway back to the cars wasn't too bad, and when I got there, I stepped inside. Clutching the wheel, I sobbed again, the memories hitting me like a ton of bricks. Why couldn't I just move on? 2 months later. The pain was still too much, so I started to see Dr. Wagner. She was older and pretty wise for her years. In a way, she helped unlock some parts of myself, ones that I had long since forgotten. I originally went to her because I had some trouble sleeping. The anxieties washed over me and I tossed and turned all night. But then our conversations turned and I started to look deeper. The subject of our relationships came up. I told her about being married to Brad and losing him. Of course, tears fell and I felt embarrassed that I even showed this side of me. But Dr. Wagner, sweet as she could be, helped me through the grief. She handed me tissues and I dried my eyes. Thanks, I said. You're totally fine, she uttered sweetly. I know just how painful this can be for you. Believe me, it's been hell. The ongoing thoughts of Brad haunt me. It hasn't been easy. I know I'm supposed to be here for my anxiety, but I feel like talking about him today, if that's alright. She smiled, the dimples and age on her face showing through, but also the openness of her heart. Go right ahead. So I did. I told her all about Brad, the love we had for each other, his cancer diagnosis, and the pain of moving on. By the end, I was a blubbering mess, but she helped me through it. I'm so sorry for being like this. No, it's fine. You had to let it out. I know, I did, but I thought by this point I'd be better. It's been almost 8 months now. A nagging question sat at the back of my mind as I looked at her. Dr. Wagner, there's something I wanted to ask you. Sure, what is it? I pursed my lips. I had to ask her now before I lost the chance. I want to move on. Brad told me to be happy, but I just can't move on. Every time I try to, it becomes physically impossible, which makes me wonder, am I capable of moving on? She didn't respond. The anxiety grew in my heart. With a sigh, I shook my head. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Not at all, she said sweetly, her dulcet voice bringing a bit of peace to my troubled heart. Moving on is possible. I see. I wonder how. I don't have the answer to that. There is no strict cookie-cutter means of getting over the grief and pain of losing a person. However, if you want to, you need to make the decision to do so. It does require time and ultimately what you want. Maybe she was right. I had to make a decision to move on. It's just that simple? I never said it was simple, Derek. What I said is you need to make the choice. Do you want to? I wanted to. So damn badly. What I wouldn't give to finally move forward and feel some inkling of happiness. I nodded. Yeah. Then make that conscious decision and do it for you, not to appease him. She glanced at the clock, telling me that it was time. As I walked out, I felt a new crossroads of emotions. I had to make the choice. When I got home, I sat in front of my computer, opening up a dating app. As I hovered my cursor over the screen, my anxiety grew. Was I ready to do this? Yes, I was. I was ready to move on and finally focus on the road ahead. For the rest of the night, I made the profile and some guys reached out to me. It felt weird to respond, but deep down, I had to do this. The decision to move on was up to me. A week later. Aren't you supposed to be on a date? I typed away at the computer. Right, I was. I had a date with a guy named Fred. He seemed nice, but... Yeah, I have to cancel. Did you at least tell him? Chris asked. I pursed my lips, my eyes glanced at the current program I was running. I will later. An exasperated sigh filled the other line. Derek, seriously. I don't know what I want, Chris, I cried out, grateful that everyone already left earlier. I'm nervous about going out on these dates. I hated ghosting dates, but this was the third one thus far I've ghosted. Chris groaned. Whatever, I'm getting tired of you constantly canceling on these guys. You're not the one dating them, I retorted. Derek, you should at least let them know. Tell you what, I'll help you find a guy, but you need to promise me you'll show up. He's a buddy of mine, someone you don't know. I bit my lip. I didn't want to go on dates with random guys. You know I don't want just anyone. He is not just anyone, Derek, trust me. If you can promise me that you'll show up for this, I'll tell him. I mentioned you in passing and he wants to see you. Conflict washed over me. I wanted to say no because that seemed logical, yet there was a part of me that just wanted to throw caution to the wind. Fine, I muttered. There you go. Next Friday. I'll text you the details. How's that? Alright. I hung up, sighing. I knew Chris meant well, but I always felt a pang of regret whenever it came to these dates. It wasn't that I wanted to ghost them, but it just became so hard for me to even focus on dating. Was it because I felt deep down that none of these guys compared to Brad? Or was there something else there? I wish I knew. I glanced back at the computer. The program was still there. Might as well get this done before I forget. For the rest of the night, I focused on my projects. The date with Fred long forgotten. Next Friday. This must be the place, right? The cafe was different. Chris said to come to the Jovial Latte, some artsy-ass cafe that had an art festival going on. As I walked inside, Chris's text vibrated in my pocket. He's in the corner. Go see him. Have fun. Smiley face. I will try. I almost canceled, but I knew Chris wouldn't let me hear the end of it. I went on a couple of dates between when Chris and I talked and today, but I just didn't feel them. Every time I was around them, I just found myself distracted thinking about Brad once again. Would I ever meet someone who would turn that part of my brain off? I doubt it. In the corner, there was a guy. He looked around my age with dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a muscular frame. In his hands was a pen, and he doodled something. Interesting. Chris did know my type, but I was surprised to see him hit the nail on the head. I slipped over there, and in the sudden rush of my heart pounding through my chest. What the? I never felt nervous like this. Excuse me, you're Greg, right? The man's blue eyes met mine, and a calm smile crossed his lips. Yep, the one and only. Chris told me about you. Good things, I hope. Absolutely. Have a seat. I was just finishing this sketch. I sat down, my eyes still on the sketchbook. You like to draw? His eyes lit up and he nodded. Of course. I actually am an artist by trade. Oh, wow, that's impressive. I'm a programmer, but I do like the arts a lot. Brad and I bonded over it. Greg smiled. Awesome. I always worry because I'll meet guys who say they like it but then want to go to a sports game. Don't worry, I'm far from one of those types. Sports aren't my thing. Greg and I immediately started talking. He was charming as he told me about the art he worked on and his dream of making it into one of the art galleries in the area. It was so easy to talk to him and I found myself genuinely enjoying my time with him. Wait, enjoying myself? It was strange. I never felt a pull towards anyone, not since Brad's death, but at the end of the night when we parted ways, Greg looked me in the eyes. There's an art festival next week. Want to come? Sure, I would love that. Awesome. I'm also going to be in it as one of the featured artists. Can't wait to see what you have ready then. A week later, I met Greg at the art festival, which was like the one at the coffee shop, except even bigger. Wow, this is impressive. Right? There's some really cool booths here. We walked down each of the aisles and Greg pointed out some of the features that he liked. As we reached the end, I stopped, looking at a small pendant. It's pretty, I marveled. I want to get it for you, Greg proposed. I stood there taken aback as Greg paid for it. He then turned and put it on my neck. I touched the pendant, the crevices soft against my fingers. My heart swelled as I looked at it. Thank you, Greg. I want to get you one too. Of course. I got him a matching pendant. I knew it was corny, but I wanted to do something sweet. We got to his booth and I stared at the canvases, highlighting different landscape art and work. It was stunning. If there was a word for the beauty I witnessed, I wish I knew it. The art was so soft, but also had a hardened feel to it. Wow, I love it. Thanks. I'm always nervous about showing off my work, but your praise is nice. I turned to him, looking at Greg in the eyes. You are very welcome. Greg was so sweet. As we finished our date at the festival, we parted ways. My heart felt full again. But was I ready to move on? The question became harder to answer with each passing day. A week after. And done. Greg turned the canvas around, revealing a picture of the two of us together. I stared at it in awe of the details. Wow, you painted yourself by memory? And you, by sitting there. You're a good model, he complimented. Thanks, I said. Here, you take it. Something to remember us. I looked at the canvas and at Greg. My face fell as I sighed. Thank you. I will. Greg moved next to me, resting his hand on mine. Something the matter? There was a lot of things. For one, I was beginning to fall for Greg, and I felt guilty about it. It's us, I began. I've been struggling to put the words together to tell you. What do you mean? That's right. Greg didn't know, unless Chris told him, but Chris was not the type to just blurt out people's private lives. I took a deep breath, gathering myself as I tried to find the right words. I really like what we have a lot, but I'm just worried about moving on. There's another guy. I shook my head. No, I was married for a few years, but lost my husband to cancer about a year ago. Chris set us up, and I've had a wonderful time, but I'm just having trouble pulling the trigger. Brad told me to be happy, but Greg's arms wrapped around me, holding me tightly. It was such a soothing embrace that it dissipated all of the tension. Whatever choice you make, know I'll be here for you. I'll wait for you, Derek, because I want this too. I hugged him back, the guilt washing over me. After I went home, I talked to Chris, who told me what I needed to hear. You've got to decide for yourself. Maybe going to Brad's grave might help bring you closure. Maybe. Thanks, Chris. I hung up, sighing. A trip to Brad's grave might help. It might be just what I need to finally close the door and take things further with Greg. The next day, the cold gravesite cast a shiver over me as I approached the gravestone. I put the chair next to it and sat there. I read Brad's grave marker, the emotions coming back. Pain, fear, sadness, loss, all that hit me and the tears fell again. Brad, I love you so much. I don't know if I'm ready to move on. I met a guy named Greg. He's amazing, but every time I'm around him, I feel like I'm disrespecting you, like I'm just moving forward in a haphazard way. I took a deep breath, sniffling. Is it right for me to move on, or should I quit now? The area fell silent. I waited for an answer, but never got one. Sighing, I nodded. All right, Brad, I won't. Suddenly, my vision grew white. I raised my hands, moving about as if I were in a dense fog. A person materialized in front of me, and it was none other than Brad. He was healthy here, his blonde hair in wisps, and those clear blue eyes immediately looking at me with a softened gaze. Brad, what are you? Relax, it's me. Take a few deep breaths. On instinct, I did as I was told. Okay, how are you communicating with me? Brad chuckled. Don't worry about that. I know you've been dealing with so much grief since I left this world. I know I was taken too soon from you. I'm so sorry, and I love you so much. Tears welled up in my eyes. I love you too, babe. That's why I'm here to tell you it's okay. You don't have to keep suffering anymore. Okay to what? Move on? I tensed up, but then, almost as if he was there, I felt Brad's hand on top of mine and his lips against my cheek. The tears streamed from my eyes, and all I could do was embrace the moment. He's still there with me, watching everything I do. Brad, I love you so much. Is it really okay? The ghost-like touch of Brad's hand touches my fingertips, providing solace. Yes, it's okay to move on, Derek. No matter what you do, just be happy. The fog disappeared, and I was back at the gravesite. I blinked, thinking about what had just happened. The tears continued to fall, but instead of sadness, I smiled. Thank you, Brad. I needed this. His words hung over me, and I realized what I needed to do. Grabbing my phone, I dialed Greg. 2 rings later, he spoke. Hey, Derek. Everything all right? Yeah, I said. Are you free tonight? There's a wine tasting. That evening, I waited for Greg in front of the entrance to the wine tasting. He showed up right at 7. We walked down each of the stalls hand in hand. Holding it felt nice, especially as I got the closure that I needed. After sampling everything, we sat on a bench in the distance, overlooking a lake. The peace and tranquility of the moon over the lake eased my troublesome heart and finally gave me what I needed. I had a good time tonight, Greg said. Me too. I turned to Greg, grabbing his hand and pulling him up. I embraced him and he hugged me back, but then I did something I never thought I'd do. Tilting his chin, I turned his face towards me, closed the gap, and kissed him. Up to this point, I had never had the courage to, but now after finally accepting my feelings, it was time. As Greg pulled back, he smiled. I've been wanting to do that for a while. Same here. What caused the change, though? You look happier, Derek. Almost lighter. A lot of things, but I saved him the details instead. I touched his hair. I finally learned how to move on. I feel good, and I would like to take you out on more dates and spend more time with you. Greg's smile warmed every inch of my heart. I would love that, Derek. We shared another kiss under the moonlit sky, and as the burden dissipated, I realized what I had needed all this time. 2 years later. Where are we going? To the art festival, babe, Greg said. He brought me to the festival where we shared one of our first dates. As we meandered down the air, I saw Greg looking almost excited. What did he have planned? I was curious. Then again, these last 2 years have been a whirlwind. After I confessed my feelings, our love bloomed, growing stronger. I never felt guilty anymore, but instead, I was happy. I finally did what Brad wanted me to do. To move on. We got to the end of the stalls, right in front of the bubbling fountain. Greg turned to me, smiling. Derek, I wanted to ask you this for a while, but I wanted the perfect moment. These last 2 years have been incredible. My art career's exploded, and I feel like I've truly found my person, my muse. I feel the same, I admitted. Greg was the one I was looking for. That's why when he got down on one knee and opened the ring box, I knew the answer as soon as the question escaped his lips. Will you marry me? With a smile, I nodded. Yes, Greg, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring on my finger and kissed me. As I basked in the touch, I looked up and I saw Brad's visage in the clouds watching over us. He was happy. I was happy. Conclusion. It's been 3 years since Greg and I got engaged. We're both so happy now and I feel whole. The past didn't hold me hostage, and the breath of fresh air I felt being with Greg was incomparable. Moving on was tough, but Greg stayed by my side. He understood the pain I went through, but instead of gazing upon me with judgment, he accepted me for who I was. I experienced hell at 35, but I also experienced happiness once again. Life's too short to hold on to the past, which is why I finally learned to accept the past and move on with my life. The end. Have you ever struggled to move on after losing someone you love? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force. And stay wholesome.